Up until this point, the Melachot of Shabbat, or the work prohibitions that have been discussed, are fairly easy to keep once they're known. If gardening or working in the yard is one of your beloved hobbies, it may be difficult to get used to the idea of not involving yourself in those activities on Shabbat. But otherwise, these activities that we've discussed so far are pretty easy to avoid. The remaining melachot involved in baking the lechem panim, or making the fabric dyes, are not as easy to avoid. These are situations that you're likely to run into in the normal course of the day of Shabbat, and it's important to be able to recognize the situations and perform the acts in ways that do not violate the sanctity of Shabbat. The next two melachot are similar in that the purpose is to separate undesired portions from the desired portions in a mixture. The difference between them is just the method that's used. The sixth step is called Zoreh, or winnowing, which is sorting using air currents. Also, scattering without selectively separating may also be included. In the days of the Mishkan, after the threshing or dash process is completed, there is still some chaff and straw that needs to be separated from the wheat kernels. This mixture of wheat and chaff was scooped up using large paddles and tossed into the air. The natural force of the wind would blow away the lighter chaff and the straw, and the heavier wheat kernels would fall back to the ground. This process was repeated until only wheat kernels were in the piles on the ground. So what are the applications for Zoreh today in Shabbat observance? Well, if there are peanuts and their thin brown coverings mixed together in a bowl, it would be prohibited on Shabbat to blow the thin coverings off of the nuts. Some may also prohibit activities that use the wind or air to disperse the substances or liquids into the air. An example of this would be shaking a tablecloth out on a windy day and having the crumbs scatter. A much more common act of separation that you're likely to be faced with every Shabbat is borer, sorting or selecting. After the chaff and other undesired portions of the wheat stalks have been removed by Zoreh, winnowing, there are still some undesired pieces left mixed in with the wheat kernels. During the time of the Mishkan, there was no other way to separate these pieces except by hand, which is borer. So borer is separating the undesired portions from the desired portions by hand from a mixture or a combination, and this is prohibited on Shabbat. So the Shabbat prohibition of borer applies whenever there's a mixture or combinations. So sorting a mixture into its individual components or taking out a single item would be considered borer. It's difficult to avoid this on Shabbat because there are many kinds of mixtures that we're faced with. There's food mixtures, mixtures of cutlery, stacks of towels or prayer books. But there are some basic principles that, if followed, allow us to select from these mixtures while still maintaining the holiness of Shabbat. Sorting or selecting is permitted if the following three conditions are met. The selecting must be done by hand, meaning without a specialized tool for selecting. So a regular fork, spoon, or knife would be considered an extension of your hand, but a slotted spoon in order to pull out the solid material from a liquid would be considered a selecting tool and would be prohibited. So the selection needs to be done by hand. And then you're also going to make sure that the desired object is what's selected rather than the waste. And then the selecting must be done for immediate use. So if there is a cluster of grapes and some of them are spoiled, instead of pulling off the spoiled grapes and discarding them, you would select the good grapes for eating or for serving. If you want the cashews from the bottom of a bowl of mixed nuts, rather than removing the other nuts to get to the cashews, you would simply stir the mixture up so that some of the cashews are on the top so that you can select what you want with your hand or with a spoon. Similarly, if you want meat that is in the bottom of the cholent pot, instead of removing the mixture that's on top or shoving it aside, you would just stir up the cholent so that the meat's on the top so that you can select that. When setting the table for Shabbat lunch, if all the pieces of cutlery are all mixed together in a pile, selecting the item that is wanted may be done in order to set the table if one is planning on sitting down to eat as soon as the table is set and the food is ready to serve. However, if you're planning on setting the table and then going to the shul before having the meal, it would be a violation of borer if the cutlery is sorted into the table settings. If all the cutlery is not needed, it may all be placed together in a drawer, but you would not be able to sort it into all of the compartments in the drawers, putting the knives with the knives and the forks with the forks. Now, if you're preparing a salad and a seed falls into the chopped salad when you're squeezing the lemon on it, removing only the lemon seed would be a violation of borer, since this seed is not desired in the mixture. However, it is permitted to remove the lemon seed as long as you're going to take some of the salad with it. If you're served a casserole on Shabbat and it contains peas and you do not want to eat the peas, it would be prohibited to pick the peas out and shove them aside on your plate with a fork. However, you can eat around the peas by selecting the part of the casserole that you do want to eat. There really are endless examples of mixtures that you could be faced with on Shabbat and need to select from. So think about mixtures that you deal with every day or past Shabbats, or notice it on this coming Shabbat, what kinds of mixtures you're faced with. And this is a great topic to discuss with your rabbi, because it's really not possible to cover this topic well enough in a short video. There are circumstances when it is permitted to take the waste from the food on Shabbat. Examples of this is if it's not possible to get to the food or the item otherwise, such as peeling oranges or removing the shells from eggs or nuts. Those are all permitted activities on Shabbat. Also, if you have a mixture of items and both of them are going to be used in the same meal, but you decide to separate them just before the meal. So if you're serving soup with rice in it and you want to scoop some of the rice out to serve later with the meal, that would be acceptable since it's going to all happen in the same meal. Or separating out carrots and pineapple that you have mixed together in a salad, you decide you want to separate the pineapple out. That would be acceptable as long as you're planning on eating it at some time during the meal. Also, when the food and the waste are inside your mouth, the waste can be removed. If you take a bite of fish and there's some bones in it, it's of course fine to pull the bones out of your mouth. Or if you've eaten a cherry or an olive, you can remove the pit from your mouth. Also, as in the earlier example with the lemon seed inside the salad, it's permitted to remove waste from a mixture as long as you're moving some of the food along with it. So if you have an insect in your salad or hair in your soup, of course you can remove those. You'll just want to take some salad with it or some soup with it so that you're not taking out only the waste. Also, when feeding children, it's acceptable to take the waste from what's desired. I hope this has been helpful for you in learning more about the 39 Melachot of Shabbat. There is much more to this Av Melacha of Borer, so continue on your journey of learning. There are still many more of the 39 Melachot to go, so keep your eyes on Torch.